Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Live from the White House, the president there sitting next to his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, across the table from the Prime Minister of Norway, who is in town for meetings today. They're going to have a bilateral in the Oval Office. Probably about an hour from now, we'll walk into the Oval together and bring you into that conversation. Jonas Stira at the White House, alongside Jens Stoltenberg, his Trump whisperer, sitting in on the meetings today. Donald Trump had very nice things to say about Stoltenberg from the years he was running NATO as Secretary General. They're going to get behind closed doors now. And again, following lunch, there will be a bilateral news conference that takes place. Not so much a news conference, but, you know, a little conversation, if you will, around the fireplace in the Oval Office. Some interesting headlines crossing there. Everyone's talking about Ukraine, at least for the most part. That is really driving the agenda in this meeting today. Thinking very strongly, Ukraine, Russia want peace. The headline from Donald Trump, Ukraine, Russia need to get to the table. Think we will get peace. Saying he has his own deadline on Ukraine when asked about that. There was a reporter who asked him as well about potentially winning the Nobel Peace Prize, which he seemed to enjoy. Now, all of this comes after a massive missile and drone attack by Russia against Kyiv last night. At least 9 dead, more than 60 wounded. As we talk about conditions here for peace, Bloomberg is making news. We've talked a lot about conditions for Ukraine, right? You lose Crimea, you freeze the lines in place, you never get to join NATO, maybe peacekeepers from Europe, but not Americans. Conditions for Russia are suddenly emerging. According to Bloomberg, persons familiar, the U.S. will demand Russia accept Ukraine's right to have its own army and defense industry. This may be a non-starter for Moscow, as Vladimir Putin has made it clear. Remember, before the invasion even happened, it was about the demilitarization of Ukraine. So where are we? As Steve Witkoff prepares to pack his bags for Moscow, we're joined by Ben Jensen, a new voice on the program, and looking forward to the conversation with Ben, director of the Futures Lab and senior fellow with the Defense and Security Department at CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Ben, it's great to have you. I'm fascinated by this new wrinkle here because this has really seemed like a negotiation that favored Russia until now. Does this move the needle? And will this meeting with Norway help us get any closer to peace?
So, great question, and thank you for having me. I would say we don't know what will move the needle yet because we're in the middle of a complex negotiation process that doesn't lend itself necessarily to social media hot takes, whether it's by our own political leaders or quick comments and nightly addresses by Ukraine. Historically, negotiations take time and they take discretion. And so you're seeing a real tension play out, and each side is using a mix of private communication, direct private messages through intermediaries and also directly, as well as these public claims to try to gain a position of leverage. And so I think we're starting to see now that actually behind the scenes, Trump's team has been putting pressure on Moscow. I know sometimes from the outside it doesn't look like that, but this is the first sign that there has been pressure put on Moscow to accept some type of concession. So it's the mix of carrots and sticks that are really going to matter, and you can't have all the carrots and sticks publicly revealed or people start to maneuver around them. So does it move the needle? Maybe, but I think more importantly what it reminds us of is that not everything is as it appears from the outside.
Yeah, isn't that always the case? Well, Vladimir Putin certainly isn't waiting around. As you heard me mention, the attacks on Kyiv, missiles and drones were horrifying. The images are horrifying, and I'm guessing that President Trump saw them in his daily briefing today. He took to Truth Social, pretty quick post, at least for Donald Trump. It says, "I am not happy with the Russian strikes on Kyiv." If you're with us on YouTube, you see the post. "Not necessary and very bad timing," he writes. "Vladimir, stop!" Exclamation point. 5,000 soldiers a week are dying. Let's get the peace deal done! Exclamation point. Pretty interesting. Vladimir, stop. Ben, will he?
No. In fact, I would direct you and your viewers and listeners to check out our firepower strike tracker at CSIS. So for over a year now, we've actually been scraping statistics to analyze how Russia uses a mix of long-range drones, the Shahed, as well as ballistic missiles and cruise missiles to effectively negotiate by fire, to use a punishment strategy as a way of gaining strategic leverage over President Zelensky through trying to kill as many Ukrainian civilians as possible. This is completely counterintuitive to most of the ways we've talked about war in the 21st century, but it shows us that war remains not only a continuation of politics, but ultimately tragic and brutal. And so what Putin did is not necessarily any different than what he's done. What you're seeing is that Ukraine is at a critical point because Russia is actually getting more sophisticated in its targeting, better able to integrate satellite intelligence, better to integrate cyber intelligence, and now increasingly being able to direct a complex mix of ballistic cruise missiles and then more sophisticated Shaheds that resist Ukrainian electronic warfare. And if you check out that firepower strike tracker, we detail with all the statistics. We actually break down and do the analysis to show that when you mix the different types of attacks and you concentrate them in a geographic space, so I mix ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones just on the capital, it's going to lower the probability that Ukraine can intercept them. And it's going to actually begin to really wage this punishment strategy into a brutal war of attrition, which we've already seen. So it might have seemed like it was audacious, it was bad timing, but this is central to Russia's strategy. They can't win on the battlefield. They're throwing their own young men, literally what the Ukrainians call them as meat assaults, at front lines where they're killed by drones. And so their bid for success when they can't win with this 21st century version of trench warfare is to try to bomb the Ukrainians into submission. It's utterly brutal, and our president is right to take the stance he did.
This is incredible, Ben. Terrifying as you describe this. I'm looking right now. You check this out, guys. Go Google it. As Ben mentioned here, Russian firepower strike tracker, analyzing missile attacks in Ukraine. This is great work from the Futures Lab at CSIS. Ben, that would suggest that the closer we get to peace, the more violent this conflict will be.
I think you're absolutely right. And in fact, that's something for, your viewers and listeners to really take into consideration. There is a tendency now moving from the political and strategic level down to the operational for each side to take more risk and gambles to seek territorial concessions or some kind of additional. Basically, everyone's competing to get new chips before they head to the poker table called these negotiations. So I think you're not just going to see Russia increase these kind of highly concentrated firepower strikes. You're going to see them continue to sacrifice the lives of future Russian generations. You are also going to see them beg, borrow, and steal from North Korea, China, and Iran to build up their arsenal of authoritarianism. But at the same time, on the other side, you're also probably going to see the Ukrainians pull off some pretty daring raids and long-range strikes. And the Ukrainians have been utterly ingenious throughout this war. Remember, this is a country that entered the conflict with 5 drone companies and now has over 500. And they produce thousands of FPVs, first-person view drones, all the way up to long-range, low-cost cruise missiles daily. So you're, I think, going to see not just Russia increasingly try to punish the Ukrainian people. I would expect to see more long-range Ukrainian raids. So in the last week alone, you've had a Ukrainian strike on Russian strategic bomber bases and also a Ukrainian long-range strike on a major ammunition depot. So I think we're going to also see the Ukrainians trying to get those poker chips for the negotiation table as well.
Wow. All right, Ben, I want to ask you about Crimea specifically, and I want to bring you back to this post that Donald Trump made yesterday on Truth Social. I'm sure you saw it. Ukrainian President Zelensky, he writes, is boasting on the front page of the Wall Street Journal that Ukraine will not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. Donald Trump goes on to write, this statement is very harmful to the peace negotiations with Russia in that Crimea was lost years ago under the auspices of President Barack Hussein Obama and is not even a point of discussion. He goes on to say that if he wants Crimea, why didn't they fight for it 11 years ago when it was handed over to Russia without a shot being fired? That's a bit of revisionist history if you were paying attention to things then. The press secretary at the White House, Caroline Leavitt, picked it up from there in the White House driveway yesterday. Ben, here's what she said.
Well, as President Trump rightfully pointed out in that statement, it was President Obama who gave up Crimea, who allowed Russia to take it over in 2014. And so the president is not asking Ukraine to recognize Crimea. Nobody has asked them to do that. What he is asking is for people to come to the negotiating table recognizing that this has been a brutal war for far too long. And in order to make a good deal, both sides have to walk away a little bit unhappy.
Ben, you don't have to wade into the Obama stuff, but aren't we asking Ukraine to acknowledge Crimea as Russian territory? And what would happen to those Russian sub bases if, in fact, Crimea went back to Kyiv?
So I think what you're seeing in all of this, if rhetoric and reality have not aligned for some time in American politics. So I think the president's trying to make the point that he wants them to negotiate. The challenge, and this is where the details matter, is if you look at Article 2 of the Ukrainian Constitution, and we're Americans, so constitutions matter to us. Our own constitution matters. And we know that other countries also guarantee rights to their citizen, natural rights, through structures like constitutions. Article 2 of the Ukrainian Constitution makes it impossible for President Zelensky to recognize Crimea as part of Russia. And the Ukrainians, frankly, did fight for it. They fought for a long time. It's just that Russia, through a manipulation of the law of armed conflict, used the little green men to seize it. And frankly, there were a lot of Russian pensioners in Crimea and large Russian naval bases, making it easier. So what you have right now is a very interesting situation where the president is just doing what he does. He really likes to turn up the rhetoric. He likes to say things that grab our attention, and he's frankly successful at it, and pull us in a way that he can try to pressure both Ukraine and Russia to try to negotiate to achieve this objective, which in a larger strategic sense means that the United States can focus on the ongoing Iran negotiations and also focus more on China. But in the meantime, what's happening is it's unsettling some of the larger complexities of any peace deal. So Crimea is going to be hard for the Ukrainians to win back militarily, and it's definitely going to be something the Russians will resist giving at the negotiation table, owing exactly to what you put out. Crimea is key maritime terrain. And not only is it key maritime terrain, Russia actually still maintains large space infrastructure there for communicating with its satellite constellation. So Crimea is important both from a maritime and a space standpoint, but also increasingly a symbolic standpoint. So it's hard to see that Russia's really going to be willing to negotiate with it. And it's hard to imagine, short of a catastrophic collapse of the Russian military along the front line, that Ukraine can take it by military force, which means we're left with a very difficult reality. Ukraine cannot cede Crimea until it adjusts its own constitution. It can't do constitutional referendums under martial law in the middle of the war. So there's really a coordination challenge involved with these negotiations about what has to move first. Can you have elections in Ukraine? Can you put those things up? And it also is a reminder to us that no matter what we hear on Truth Social or what Zelensky says in a nightly address, this process is going to take months, if not years, to play out. And the details are what will matter. The technical details are what drives negotiations in the end.
Really fascinating. You know what I love, Ben, is someone who knows what they're talking about. I'm really glad that you could come to share your expertise with us, and I hope you'll stay close because this is a story developing before our eyes. Benjamin Jensen, Director of the Futures Lab, Senior Fellow, Defense Security Department at CSIS. Let me know when you're ready to host the show. That was fascinating. A clinic with Ben Jensen. These are the kind of conversations we try to bring you every day here on the fastest show in politics, only on Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Glad you're with us here on Bloomberg Radio, satellite radio channel 121, and on YouTube. With our eyes on the White House, we're going to go back there shortly for a bilateral meeting with President Trump and the Prime Minister of Norway. You might think you just saw that. That was actually the beginning of their luncheon. Prime Minister arrived a short time ago. They're going to break bread, and then they'll be in the Oval Office with reporters a bit later on. Ukraine is a major story that we're following here today, as it is the top agenda item in this conversation. Jens Stoltenberg is also in the room, the former NATO Secretary General. As we consider the polls this morning that are making the rounds, you might have heard about some of these yesterday. Reuters Ipsos, 37% of Americans approve of Donald Trump's handling of the economy. Pew Research, Donald Trump's overall approval rating falling to 40% in the first 100 days. Confidence in his economic leadership dropping to 45%. Gallup's got ugly numbers. And you know who else does? Fox News. Fox News poll, first 100 days of President Trump's second term, and it doesn't look great. He receives the best marks on border security, the only issue where his ratings are in positive territory. His worst are on inflation. Only 33% approve, 59% disapprove. Tariffs, pretty similar, 33% disapprove. Foreign policy, 40%. Taxes and guns, none of these are looking good. And so maybe we shouldn't have been surprised this morning on Truth Social when Donald Trump started writing. This is only 2 hours ago. Rupert Murdoch, he says, has told me for years he's going to get rid of his Fox News Trump-hating fake pollster, but he has never done so. This pollster, in quotes, has gotten me and MAGA wrong for years, he says. While he's at it, should start making changes at the China-loving Wall Street Journal. Not a fan of the paper either. This is where we start with our panel, both experts on polling. Rick Davis is with me here at the table in Washington. Our Republican strategist partner at Stone Court Capital, Jeannie Shanzano in New York, political science professor at Iona University, our Democratic analyst. What do you think, Rick? Is Fox about to get a new pollster? And what does this tell us about the first 100 days of this president?
Well, if he doesn't like the Fox pollster, he doesn't like any pollsters, because as you pointed out, they're all basically saying the same thing, which is save for border security, which is basically incursions have all but dried up under the Trump administration. Nobody's coming across the border illegally. Everything else is a dismal failure. I mean, negative 26% on inflation. Yeah. This is what he campaigned on. Right. I'm going to bring those costs down. I mean, economy, he won on the economy, and now negative 16%. On that rating. I mean, it's really, really bad news. And you can only make the assumption that, this first 100 days, unless there's a significant change in what's happening, it could portend really poorly for these midterm elections. I mean, we're a long way away. Nobody's voting today. But if you're, after the first 100 days, these numbers are all worse than his first 100 days in 2017. Wow. So, look what happened in the midterms in 2017. We have a model to work from.
That's right. Democrats are loving this. Jeannie, I don't know your thoughts on these numbers, because Donald Trump said yesterday in the Oval Office he had a 92% approval rating, I believe. Is that not true?
I'm not sure where the 92% is coming from. To Rick's point, this is pretty consistent across most pollsters. And you look at the Real Clear Politics average, which I always like to look at averages, and he is underwater. And it's stunning that he is performing worse than he was in his first term at this point. And the problem for Donald Trump is the first 100 days are as good as it's going to get for the modern president. And so it's not going to look up here. I'm sorry to tell him. And, the reality of all of this is all of his own making. He hasn't had a crisis that has, a natural disaster or something. These are things that he has done to himself, shot himself in the foot, if you will. I mean, just imagine if he had come in, he had not gone with his idea of tariffs. He had instead worked with Congress to pass the reconciliation bill. He had worked to secure the border, but he had done so knowing that he has to follow the court orders and due process. And when he makes a mistake, send Abrego Garcia back. His numbers might be up where they were when he came in. But all of this is of his own doing. It's as if he can't halt himself or stop himself from his worst instincts. And I think number one that's going to go down in the record books is his adherence to a discredited economic policy that even a sixth grader could have told you since the Great Depression was not a good idea. And he has followed it right down the path. And this is where he ends up. I quite frankly think the numbers, he should be pretty happy. They're better than they probably should be, given how quickly he has dismantled the economy.
Geez, I don't think anyone's there to tell him that, Jeannie. Cece's, by the way, keeping us honest here. That 92% approval rating was on veteran services, and it was still not correct. So, Rick, I guess the question is here, is it the cadence, or is it in fact the issues that he's tackled? If Donald Trump was in there signing EOs every day, keeping the media running, but it was actually about lowering prices, would we be having a different conversation?
Look, I think that part of it is the rhetoric and part of it is the impact, right? We know that there hasn't been substantial increases in inflation, as these numbers might actually indicate. But there also has not been substantial decreases. And even though Donald Trump likes to talk about the price of gas coming down, eggs, he's just not making that case. And by the way, he's drowning out all that noise, all that message with the noise around tariffs, the noise around attacks of people, the negotiations on Ukraine. We've talked about this a lot during the campaign season. Indeed. He's not getting any points for trying to solve the Ukraine-Russian war, right? Right thing to do. Voters aren't going to give him credit for it. And I think the one thing that Fox poll really indicated was that people have a very dim view of the future. It's not just where they are today, but overwhelmingly the economy is getting worse, 55%. Trump policies are in the long run are going to be bad, negative 11%. It's a dismal future to most of these voters. And you see that in the consumer data, Michigan Consumer Sentiment, best poll in America. Same thing. People don't see this getting better.
Mm-hmm. And Jeannie, that's not just Democrats in this case. And of course, we're hearing on a daily basis from pretty smart economists at major firms who we hear from on the regular here on networks like Bloomberg, and they're increasing their odds for a recession. If we find ourselves in one in, say, the second half of the year, maybe by the end of the second quarter, what happens to these numbers?
They're going to continue to get worse, because what we've seen so far is almost at every step, experts in particular fields, whether it's economists on the economy, whether it's legal experts on what he's doing with the courts or in education, the experts in those areas are telling him to stop. They are saying he is moving in the wrong direction. And the public is always going to be a little slower. We're a little slower to catch up with that. And it's a little slower to be reflected in the public opinion polls. But that is what's going to happen eventually if he doesn't stop. And, I think we've seen this week, Susie Wiles and others trying to tamp down a little bit. You notice they have sort of tried to get him not to talk until the markets are closed when he sort of goes rambling. They're trying to contain it. But if he keeps barreling down these paths, the numbers in these polls and consumer sentiment and everything else are just going to continue to get worse. And so, the big question is, who's there in the White House to stop him? It doesn't seem like a lot of people. Bessent seems to have stepped up. The CEOs have come in, but he feels unshackled in this second term, and he is committed to these ideas, and he is moving down a path with no thought of the impact either on himself politically as a self-interested person, or the American public, or the world economy, quite frankly.
Rick, you mentioned Ukraine. Is there any recourse? We're going to be talking a lot more about the prospect for peace in our next hour as the president meets with the prime minister of Norway. Is there any recourse to promising over and over to be able to solve this on day one and reach 100 days with no real plan in sight? Or did no one actually believe that to begin with?
No, I think that it, first of all, everyone sort of takes that kind of thing with a grain of salt.
They do, right?
It's hyperbole for him, right? And he even claims it's hyperbole. And so you can't really tell the difference between what he's, sort of preaching about and what he actually believes. But it does have an impact. In this Fox poll, they asked about, do you think that the administration is competent? And 52% says they're not. Wow. Well, you don't want the majority of America thinking, forget if you're even trying to do the right thing, you're not competent enough to implement it. And so that is a very, very troubling number, because we all remember when Joe Biden, at this stage of his presidency, all of his numbers were significantly better than these. Yeah. But he tried to withdraw from Afghanistan on the short run, and it was a disaster, and people made a decision that he was running an incompetent government. And everything since then in his administration was bad, and he couldn't dig out of it because you couldn't convince people that you were competent. If that happens to Donald Trump, no matter what he does, it's going to be seen as incompetent through that lens.
Are you surprised that Pete Hegseth still has a job with that said?
Look, Donald Trump is, known for his quick trigger finger in firing people. He made a whole living out of a show where he did it.
Fair enough.
And so, I think people think There's no upside. I mean, it's not like he's got such stellar credentials that he brings confidence to the world community on the security business. And so what's the point of this? It was an experiment. It failed. Okay, move on.
Standing by his man from everything we can tell. But we also aren't done with the week. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
This comes, Joe, as we've gotten some fresh polling data out of all places, Fox News, on how Americans are feeling about the president's handling of tariffs and the economy overall. And on both metrics, he is underwater by a pretty wide margin. Tariff approval, disapproval, 58% disapprove of tariffs, only 33% approve of his
We are
policies.
looking at broadly the lowest approval ratings of a president in the first 100 days in modern history, which has prompted Donald Trump to get to Truth Social and call on Rupert Murdoch to fire the pollster at Fox News. I'm not sure that's going to happen. He's asking for the same at the Wall Street Journal. But of course, it brings us to the issue of tariffs, the corrosive effect that it's had on psychology in the markets, although we are feeling a little better about things today. And the corrosive impact it's had in the psyche of many consumers who are concerned about rising prices and where we're going to be in the second half of the year. Kaylee, every day we talk about economists raising odds for a recession in the second half.
Yeah, and it seems that those concerns are reflected when you're looking at more marginalized communities in terms of their financial health. According to a new survey from Hope Insider survey from the Operation Hope project, 3 of 4 participants in the survey said they are not confident that the economy will remain stable. 53% believe the change in administration will not increase job growth in their communities. Sensing
a bit of a theme here. With that in mind, we're excited to introduce John Hope Bryan, bring back to Bloomberg, the chairman, CEO, founder of Operation Hope. He's with us live from our bureau in Atlanta. John, it's great to have you with us here on Bloomberg, and I appreciate your coming to talk to us. You actually were in the Treasury Department recently to talk about financial literacy, which I know is a matter of great import to you. You spent some time with Scott Besson, who tweeted a photo of you together and wrote, "Financial literacy is a necessity, not a luxury." Is the word tariff in the financial literacy notebook that you're bringing forth?
Well, I believe that, first of all, honored to be with you. Thanks for having me. I believe that financial literacy is the civil rights issue of this generation, and the color's not black or white or red or blue. It's green. It affects all of us, and based on your reporting you just had, even more so now because the economy is basically driven, the biggest economy in the world, driven by consumer spending, over 70%, and everybody's starting to feel the pinch now. No, tariffs is not typically part of the financial literacy lexicon. I do understand that a president might want to use it as a negotiating tool in the short term to try to get someone to level a playing field with regard to trade, trade imbalances, et cetera. As a long-term tool, I think for a country that runs on sentiment, it runs on how do I feel about things, and again, the economy is mostly consumer spending. As a long-term instrument, I don't think it's productive. I actually think it's potentially harmful. I'm hopeful that this is not a long-term strategy. The 90-day pause was a nice thing to see. I think you saw the markets respond to that. You know, when you say tariffs to my population, they're thinking about bread prices, egg prices, kitchen top economics, gas prices. You know, how's it going to affect the restaurant? How's it going to affect the car they're buying or the TV that they're buying? Because a lot of this stuff has parts from all around the world, and they're smart enough at least to understand that if there's a tax on that, which is what a tariff is, that the importer is going to have to potentially raise those prices if it lasts for a period of time. I do have confidence in Secretary Scott Bessent, though. I do have enormous confidence in him, and I think that he will find a way with the administration to maneuver us forward.
So if you think the Treasury Secretary is the adult in the room, and there's been much reporting about his role in implementing or having the president implement that 90-day pause, perhaps pulling him back from the ledge on firing the chair of the Federal Reserve, what has he shared with you? Has he given you any insight into the administration's thinking, what he's receiving back when he brings forward those messages?
I spent over an hour with the Secretary, and it was a very serious meeting, and he took the issue very seriously, rightly so. I've known 12 Secretaries of the Treasury, 9 U.S. presidents. We've been recognized by 5. I've served 3 from both parties. This is the most serious conversation that I can recall ever having with the Secretary of the Treasury on this issue of financial literacy. We covered a lot of ground. I'm going to answer your question directly. But I intentionally did not cover tariffs with him because I knew that the president has had this on his mind since 1980. He's been talking about this since 1980. He's going to do it one way or another. Why put the secretary in a position where he can't answer a question, or it's a question that can't be answered? So let's, it is what it is. Let that go forward. There are a lot of other things that we have more control over, and that's going to, again, play itself out the way it plays itself out. The things that I did engage him on, he was completely transparent about. He wanted to have constructive criticism, a critique. He wanted to know how policies were affecting the average citizen. He wanted feedback on that on a regular basis. He understood that this is a nonpartisan issue, that you need, this can't be something that gets put into some partisan discussion where only one group supports it. That it will fail that way. You need Republicans and Democrats, blacks and whites, rich and poor, urban and rural. You need my population that I represent, we're the largest in the country, to embrace something that makes sense from the administration. So he's very smart, I think, to ask a group that has 1,500 offices in the country and a pulse on what's going on for not only just help with the program side, and maybe we give him some policy recommendations he might like, he's invited those, but also to help at the right time to get, this really could be a unifying issue for the country. And at a time where everybody argues over, is it dark outside? Is it light out? Is that really light? No, it's not light. Somebody's lying to me, right? You can't, somebody says something's up, somebody says, no, that's down, right? Everybody's like in the business of arguing. And I think people are exhausted by it, by the way. Isn't it nice that there's a topic that actually most people agree on? And I think he thinks financial literacy could be that issue that is a unifier. Now, we got to get all the noise out the way, the political noise and the partisanship out the way. People saw me meeting for the administration from, you call it my community, and folks start coming at me with that. And I said, look, trust me, sit down for a minute. I've known this guy for a decade. He's a good man. And just trust me, I think there's something we can do here that's good for everybody. And they said, great. Well, that has to happen. Everybody has to say, this is a radical movement of common sense. This is something we can agree on. This is something we can get done. And let's work on it. And that's his view. And it was very refreshing, actually. I didn't feel uncomfortable in any part of the meeting. He was himself, which is direct and transparent. And he was squarely focused on this issue. But he also understood that financial literacy ripples out into the broader economy. In other words, he wasn't treating this like some trinket issue or some marginal issue. Yeah.
Well, he referred to you as a longtime friend in his post supporting this idea on Financial Literacy Month. And we appreciate your bringing us inside that conversation, John, because, the president's surrounded by a lot of different people who have a lot of different ideas about all of these things. And there were some pretty ugly tweets that we saw. Posts on X from the likes of Laura Loomer referred to you as a pro-impeachment Trump hater. Even Elon Musk retweeted that, calling it troubling. And I'm wondering if you have any reaction to what you heard there, or if that might impact your relationship with this administration.
What I believe is that the election's over, and he's the president of the United States. And as I've said on multiple TV interviews and black urban radio interviews, if the president succeeds, we succeed. If the president fails, we fail. What's complicated about this? Nobody should be rooting for his failure. We should be trying to help him succeed. which is exactly why I risked, pushback from my traditional community to go and have this meeting, which I thought was important on the first day of Financial Literacy Month. And luckily, I'm getting very proud of the black and brown community. They're very mature about it. They were like, yeah, it's not about black or brown, John, as you said. It's about the green, right? It's not, so go get us some green. Let's see what we get. And Dr. King was assassinated 57 years ago this month, and we were in Memphis for that with Republicans, by the way, and Democrats, and members of the Trump administration with us. And for 3 hours, nobody said anything negative about anybody. I banned it. Nope, no hating, no arguing, no nothing. And it was about solutions and the business plan for America. And of course, Dr. King died trying to help poor whites, which is the largest population of poverty in this country then and today. And we have a business plan we created for rural America, where a lot of poor whites live. We have a business plan for black Americans and for women and for Latinos and for Asians and for Native American Indians. And it's all published. It's all transparent. You can download it. Most people have read it and go, wow, it actually makes some sense. I like this. There's something for me here. We've got to get back to that conversation because the Bible says a house divided cannot stand. We keep on with this ridiculousness, ladies and gentlemen, and we want to worry about whether we're hating on each other because everybody wants to be an American but Americans. We'll be speaking Mandarin in 20 years because there are other countries that want to be us. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea want our way of life. They want what we have. They can't get it in a fair fight. They can only get it if we mess it up. And we got to figure out whether we're better together. That's what Dr. King believed. That's what I believe. So, what does like have to do with it? I mean, this has to do with do we, I really respect me and learn to like me, that like me never respect me, right? And do we respect each other? Because by the way, we need different views. This country is made up, on the way in here, I heard from my people that California, which went from the 5th largest economy in the world to the 4th largest economy, ahead of Japan, right? Well, California, I believe, is the most diverse place in the United States of America. And New York, I believe you guys are in New York, is the second most biggest economy, right, in the U.S. And it also is one of the most diverse places. So diversity wins. Diversity wins. And by the way, most people are immigrants, including my European friends. And of course, black folks got on the wrong boat. That's another conversation. Look, we gotta lighten the temperature, and laser in the focus on what we are really about. What's the business plan for this country? And how can we, again, this is the biggest economy in the world, and it's 70% consumer spending. That's all of us doing better.
Well, and to return to the point you were just making on everybody wants to be the United States of America, I wonder what you make of the narrative that has been working its way through financial market participants in the last month or two about the end of US exceptionalism. Is that the way you see it? Is that what these policies could bring about?
I think every 50 to 70, maybe certainly 100 years, this country has an identity crisis. We had it with the first Reconstruction, which was, of course, we had it with the war for our independence. But then you had the first Reconstruction, which was slavery, right? That was a decision. By the way, the Republican Party, people don't know, was birthed on freedom and anti-slavery agenda. I don't know if people know that. That was why Lincoln got so much heck. But that was the first Reconstruction. And then you had Frederick Douglass, a black man, working with Abraham Lincoln, a white man, and Frederick Douglass criticized Abraham Lincoln. But Lincoln was smart enough to recognize stuff he didn't know, as smart as he was, and he brought Frederick Douglass into the conversation. At the end of the day, Frederick Douglass made him a better president. His council made him a better president. That constructive friction, Lincoln realized, was a good thing, not just negative friction, constructive friction. Then we have the second Reconstruction, the Civil Rights Movement. And President Johnson, who happened to be a Democrat, did not like or did not get along with Dr. King. Dr. King got along with pretty much everybody. But they figured out they were better together. They ended up with 4 civil rights bills by a guy who called people really interesting names. I'm talking about Johnson. And then you had the third Reconstruction, which is what I think we're in today, 2020 to 2030. And so I'm not surprised that the country's basically going through a colonic. I mean, this is one huge digestive exercise where we got to flush a lot of things through our system, and we got to figure out, right? Can you survive hard right, and that's it? Can you survive hard left, and that's it. I don't think so. I think most people are actually massively in the middle. It's a radical movement of common sense. They want to pay their mortgage. They want to send their kid to college, right? They want to start a business or go work for one. They want to go to the park with their kids. They want to enjoy their neighbors. The diversity actually is part of our magic sauce. It's just that the diversity is a little darker these days. It's a little bit more tan. But the diversity is all. Do you know that women, in 1972, a woman could not get a bank account? Not 1872. In the second Reconstruction, affirmative action, which was created for blacks, actually went to benefit white women. And I say, bravo, by the way. Today, women couldn't get a loan unless her husband guaranteed it in 1972. Today, women are a third of the U.S. economy. If we hadn't done that, if we hadn't had that debate and won it with common sense, where would we be today? A third of all women, I think it's like $7 trillion is the women's contribution to GDP. We'd be an also-ran country. We'd be a third world country as economically. Here we go again. Half of this country, 40% of this country is black and brown. I love math because it doesn't have an opinion. Within 10 years, there'll be a majority of minorities. The largest group of baby boomers in the history are beginning to retire. As you know, there's going to be a $100 trillion wealth transfer in the next 10 or 20 years. That's basically white, wealthy people trying to go play golf at the same time. The businesses, who's going to buy them? The GDP, who's going to replace them? My rich friends need my poor friends to do better, if only to stay rich. And so this is what I told the secretary, is you can't, I'm sorry, I didn't tell the secretary this part. I told TV this part. You can't cut yourself alone out of this crisis. Yes, there is waste. There is bloating. Let's get to that in an intelligent way, not in a the how is as important as the what. We can be gracious about this. We can understand it's not the employee's fault if they're working at an agency that may not be efficient. Let's deal with that in an intelligent way. Get that out of the way. Now let's at the bottom third of the economy and make them capitalists. And let's repair the ladder and let them become homeowners. 44% of black people own a home compared to 75% of their white counterparts. That's good for banks, for them to get financially literate, right? Then get their credit score up. By the way, credit score increases of 100 points in Black America alone is worth $750 billion by 2053. Then you go buy homes, 44% to 60% home ownership for Black America alone. That's good for $800 billion. That's $1.5 trillion of wealth creation and 2 to 3% of GDP increases every year. And then you have business acquisition. The baby boomers don't want the businesses. The baby boomers are retiring. They want to give away the stocks, bonds, the cash, all that stuff in the homes. The family wants that. The family don't want the businesses. Well, let somebody buy that business. That's $1 trillion of wealth creation. And AI, artificial intelligence. I'm co-chair with Sam Altman on the AI Ethics Council, and I'm co-chair with Doug McMillan of Walmart on financial literacy for all. This is civil rights and civil rights. These two things, that's $1 trillion. So that's $3.5 trillion of new wealth creation by 2053, 20 years or so. Yeah. And 2 to 3% of additional GDP. Who doesn't want that? I mean, when the black person succeeds in this example, or the poor rural white, or the woman, or the Latino, or the Asian, yes, here legally, when they succeed, all boats rise. This is a radical movement of common sense. I just think that no one's really having this conversation, but this is the conversation. And
that's why we wanted you to be here, John. If we just let you keep talking, I feel like you're going to solve this for us right now in this hour. There are very few people who come on Bloomberg and we clear the decks for like this. At some point, we are going to check the markets. But while you're still with us, live from Atlanta here, there's the old saying, if you're getting it on both sides, you're doing something right. And I suspect that you feel like that right now. Would you go back to meet with this Treasury Secretary again?
If he invites me, I'll come back, sure. I was there meeting with other folks a couple weeks, last week actually. Look, I'm going to give him some room and let him do his job. He's helping to run the world economy. He knows my number. If he wants to call me, I'll answer. But let him have some room. Let him talk to some other people. Let him. Look, we have the largest infrastructure for financial literacy coaching in America. We're not going anywhere. And we're the best in class, and we're in urban communities. 20% of our offices are in white, poor, rural communities, by the way. And they don't care what color I am. They just care whether they're getting their earned income tax credit, their credit score up, their debt down, their savings up, and the bank says yes to an approval. And so we have this infrastructure that's growing, 1,500 offices total, millions of clients, and we're here when the Secretary of the Treasury and by extension the administration has some make sense things they'd like to do that we can be helpful for. And if they don't need us, we'll go on about our business.
All right, we'll leave it on that note. John, thank you so much for being so generous with your time today. John Hope Bryant, Operation Hope, Inc., Chair, CEO, and founder, here with us on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.